Imagine a time when 13 small colonies dared to challenge the mightiest empire on earth. They had no army, no wealth, only belief. That belief built cities, won wars, and reached the moon. From George Washington's struggle to Lincoln's promise, from industrial might to digital empires, this is the unstoppable rise of America. Every century tested its strength, and every generation redefined freedom. Before the land was divided into states, before flags waved and cities rose, there was only wilderness, stretching endlessly beneath the sky. The rivers spoke in silence, the forests whispered stories no one yet heard, and across those vast lands, ancient nations lived, the Native Americans, guardians of the earth, the spirit, and the wind. They had no written borders, yet they knew every valley, every mountain, every rhythm of the land. It was a world untouched by the noise of ambition, a balance between man and nature. Then, across the Atlantic Ocean, whispers began to rise, whispers of discovery, gold, freedom, and destiny. In the 15th and 16th centuries, ships sailed westward, guided by faith, greed, and curiosity. The Europeans arrived on the shores of a new world, and with them came the clash of civilizations that would reshape history. The Spanish built missions and sought treasure in the south and west. The French explored the north and the great rivers, and the English planted colonies along the eastern coast. 13 of those colonies would one day stand together as the foundation of a new nation. But at that time, they were fragile settlements, struggling against hunger, storms, and the unknown. The people who came were not kings or soldiers. They were dreamers, pilgrims, workers, men and women seeking something that Europe could not give them, a chance to be free, to own their land, to live by their beliefs. They came with faith and fear, with courage and desperation, not knowing that their footprints would one day lead to the rise of a superpower. The British Crown ruled over them, and for decades the colonies grew under its shadow. Trade, culture, and towns flourished, yet the spirit of independence began to stir. Taxation without representation, control without consent, these ideas planted seeds of rebellion. Pamphlets were printed, voices rose, and in every tavern the talk of freedom burned brighter. It was more than politics. It was identity. Who were these colonists, English subjects, or something new entirely? The tension grew until, in 1775, gunfire echoed in Lexington and Concord. The American Revolution had begun. Ordinary farmers became soldiers, scholars became leaders, and a collection of small colonies stood against the might of the British Empire. The odds were impossible, the risks unthinkable, yet their belief was unbreakable. George Washington led them through winters of despair and moments of glory, and after years of blood and sacrifice, victory came. In 1776, a declaration was written, words that would echo through centuries. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Those lines were not just a statement of rebellion. They were a promise to the future, a promise that would take generations to fulfill, tested through wars, divisions, and dreams. But the new nation was fragile, uncertain, and unproven. The Constitution was drafted to bind together the ideals of liberty, justice, and unity. 13 states became one country under a single banner, the United States of America. Its birth was not the end of struggle, but the beginning of a greater journey. The 19th century brought expansion, exploration, and conflict. From the smoky factories of the North to the cotton fields of the South, a new economy emerged, powered by ambition and invention, but also chained by the tragedy of slavery. The contradiction was clear. A nation founded on freedom held millions in bondage. The tension between ideals and reality tore deeper with every passing decade. As settlers pushed westward, they crossed rivers, mountains, and plains, guided by a belief known as manifest destiny, the idea that America was destined to stretch from ocean to ocean. With that belief came opportunity, discovery, and innovation, but also destruction, displacement, and suffering for native peoples. The land that once sang with ancient voices now trembled under iron rails and the wheels of progress. Yet through struggle and expansion, America continued to grow restless, bold, and divided. The issue of slavery could no longer be ignored. In 1861, the nation broke apart in the most devastating conflict in its history, the Civil War. Brothers fought brothers, families were torn apart, and cities burned. The war tested not only the unity of the nation, but the meaning of its founding words. When Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, he reminded the world that the struggle was for a new birth of freedom. When the war ended, slavery was abolished, but equality remained distant. Reconstruction brought hope and heartbreak as the South rebuilt and the country tried to heal its wounds. In the late 19th century, the United States began to transform again. Steam engines, steel mills, and new technologies fueled an industrial revolution. Immigrants arrived by the millions, bringing dreams and diversity to the growing cities. The skyline began to rise, and with it, the American identity evolved a fusion of cultures, colors, and ideas. The Gilded Age glittered with wealth, but beneath it lay struggle and poverty. Workers organized, inventors innovated, and America moved faster, stronger, louder than ever before. The century turned, and the world began to notice this young nation's growing power. By the early 20th century, America stood at the crossroads of destiny. When war erupted in Europe, it tried to stay distant, but history pulled it in. World War I tested America's courage on a global scale. Soldiers crossed oceans, fought in trenches, and came home to a new sense of purpose. The 1920s roared with jazz, industry, and innovation, but the crash of 1929 brought it all to a halt. The Great Depression humbled the nation, but not its spirit. Through hardship, America rediscovered its strength, and under leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt, it rebuilt hope from despair. Then came World War II, the greatest conflict humanity had ever faced. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, the nation rose as one. Men and women joined the fight, industries turned into arsenals, and the spirit of unity burned brighter than ever. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, America's resolve reshaped the course of history. When victory came, the world was changed forever. America emerged not only as a survivor, but as a leader, a symbol of freedom and strength in a fragile new world order. The mid-20th century brought a new kind of war, not of weapons, but of ideas. The Cold War divided the world into two powers, two visions of the future. America faced the Soviet Union in a silent battle of influence, technology, and ideology. The race for space, the fear of nuclear war, the tension of global rivalry all defined this era. Yet even amid fear, progress soared. In 1969, an American stepped on the moon, and the words echoed across Earth, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." From the ashes of revolution, a new world began to form, fragile yet burning with purpose. The young United States of America stood at a crossroads, a nation without age, Past yet already burdened with the weight of destiny, the revolution had freed its people from a king, but not from the challenges of survival, identity, and unity. The founding fathers faced the monumental task of shaping a system unlike any before, one built not on monarchy or empire, but on liberty and representation. The Constitution became their answer, a living document that sought to bind freedom with order, ambition with restraint, and hope with law. It was an experiment, uncertain and bold, one that the world watched with curiosity and doubt. Many believed the new republic would collapse, that the people were too divided, too inexperienced, too passionate to govern themselves. Yet, as the ink dried on the parchment in Philadelphia, a vision was set in motion that would shape the next 2 centuries of human history. The first decades of the new nation were years of trial. The country stretched along the eastern coast, surrounded by vast frontiers and powerful rivals. France, Spain, and Britain still lingered nearby, their influence felt in trade, politics, and fear. Within the new borders, the challenge of governance tested the limits of unity. George Washington, the first president, became a symbol of integrity and restraint, guiding the fragile republic through its infancy. Under his leadership, the foundations of democracy began to settle, institutions formed, alliances were tested, and the young nation learned to walk on its own. But as always, unity came at a cost. Regional differences deepened between the industrializing North and the agrarian South, between federal power and states' rights, between the ideal of freedom and the reality of human bondage. As the 19th century unfolded, the United States began to expand. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 doubled its size, opening an era of exploration and migration. Lewis and Clark charted the unknown, their journey symbolizing the restless spirit of discovery that defined the American character. The frontier called to settlers, dreamers, and adventurers who moved westward, carving towns out of wilderness and building lives from the soil. But this expansion came at a tragic cost to Native American tribes who were displaced, destroyed, or absorbed into a new order that left little room for their way of life. The promise of growth came shadowed by suffering, and the myth of manifest destiny hid deep moral wounds that would haunt the nation for generations. Conflict was never far away. The War of 1812 tested the young nation's resilience as it faced Britain once more. The burning of Washington, the defense of Fort McHenry, and the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner became symbols of defiance and identity. Out of struggle emerged a stronger sense of unity, a belief that the Republic could stand against the greatest powers of the world. In the decades that followed, America's population grew, cities expanded, and industry began to transform the landscape. Railroads cut through forests and plains, telegraphs connected distant towns, and innovation flourished in every corner of society. Yet beneath this progress, old divisions deepened. The issue of slavery, once avoided, now stood as an unavoidable wound. Every political debate, every new territory, every compromise revolved around it. The North saw slavery as a moral stain, the South saw it as the foundation of its economy. The tension became unbearable, and by the mid-19th century, the nation reached its breaking point. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 set off a chain of events that led to secession, rebellion, and war. The Civil War erupted in 1861, a brutal conflict that tore the country in two. The battlefields of Gettysburg, Antietam, and Shiloh became sacred ground, soaked with the blood of brothers who fought for two visions of America. Through 4 years of horror, the fate of the Union hung in balance. When the war ended, slavery was abolished, but freedom's promise remained incomplete. The South lay in ruins, the North exhausted, the nation scarred. Lincoln's assassination marked not just the death of a president, but the end of innocence. Reconstruction began, a turbulent period of rebuilding, reform, and resistance. Freedmen sought equality, while old systems of power resisted change. The ideals written in 1776 and reaffirmed in 1063 faced their greatest test in the hearts and minds of a divided people. Slowly, painfully, the nation began to heal. By the end of the 19th century, a new America was emerging. The Industrial Revolution transformed everything. Factories roared, cities swelled, and immigrants arrived by the millions, bringing new energy and dreams. The Statue of Liberty rose in New York Harbor as a beacon to those seeking a new beginning. Wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but innovation lifted the many. Trains crossed the continent, bridges spanned mighty rivers, and electricity began to light the darkness. It was an age of invention, ambition, and contradiction, an America both rich and restless, powerful and divided. The closing of the frontier marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, as the nation turned its gaze outward toward global influence. At the dawn of the 20th century, America stepped onto the world stage. The Spanish-American War in 1898 marked the birth of an empire, with territories stretching beyond the mainland. The Panama Canal symbolized its engineering might, connecting oceans and commerce. Cities reached for the skies with steel and stone, while new social movements demanded fairness, labor rights, and justice. Progressives challenged corruption, women fought for the vote, and technology reshaped every part of life, but progress brought new anxieties. The same ambition that built cities also built weapons. The same drive for growth that lifted millions also deepened inequality. America was rising, but the cost of power was beginning to show. When Europe plunged into war in 1914, the United States at first watched from a distance, bound by isolation and caution. But the tides of global conflict could not be ignored forever. In 1917, America entered the First World War, and the might of its industry and spirit helped turn the balance. The war ended, but the peace that followed was fragile. The 1920s roared with music, motion, and modernity, a decade of prosperity and cultural change. Jazz filled the air, automobiles filled the streets, and skyscrapers touched the clouds. Yet beneath the glitter, cracks were forming. The stock market crash of 1929 brought the nation to its knees. The Great Depression stole jobs, homes, and hope. Breadlines stretched through cities, and despair filled the hearts of millions. Out of that darkness rose new strength. Under Franklin D. Roosevelt's leadership, the New Deal rebuilt confidence, redefined government, and reminded the nation that endurance was its greatest virtue. Just as recovery began, the storm of war returned. In 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor shattered peace and thrust America into World War II. Factories turned to armories, citizens became soldiers, and the entire nation united with one voice and one purpose. From Normandy to Hiroshima, the war tested every measure of courage and conscience. When it ended, the world was forever changed, and America stood as a new kind of power, not an empire of land, but of ideas, technology, and influence. The years that followed brought triumph and tension. The Cold War began, dividing the planet into two rival visions of the future: democracy and communism. The nuclear age dawned, and fear became a constant companion. Yet even amid this global rivalry, the United States led in science, culture, and innovation. The Civil Rights Movement challenged the nation to live up to its founding ideals. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of dreams that echoed Jefferson's promises, and the long road toward equality continued. The 1960s were years of change: the space race, social upheaval, war in Vietnam, and the questioning of everything once certain. Yet through chaos and challenge, America continued to push forward, its spirit defined by the refusal to yield. The end of the 20th century brought both triumph and transformation. The Cold War faded into history as the Berlin Wall fell, and the United States stood as the last superpower, a symbol of democracy, technology, and global influence. The age of fear gave way to an age of innovation. The internet connected millions, new industries were born, and the American dream evolved once again. Yet, with power came new responsibilities. The victories of the past century did not erase the challenges that remained within. Economic change left some communities behind, cultural divisions grew louder, and the balance between freedom and unity became harder to hold. Still, the pulse of progress continued, driven by the same force that had guided the nation from its earliest days, the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. As the 1990s dawned, America entered a new era defined not by war or expansion, but by technology and globalization. Silicon Valley became the new frontier, a digital revolution rising from code and circuits. Innovation replaced conquest, ideas became the new currency. The Cold War had ended without a final battle, and the world looked to America for leadership, stability, and vision. Prosperity grew, music and media shaped culture across continents, and the American lifestyle spread through television, film, and the emerging internet. But beneath the celebration of progress, shadows lingered: inequalities, racial divides, and political conflicts that reminded the nation that even the strongest dream requires constant renewal. The world was changing faster than ever, and America had to change with it. Dawn of the 21st century arrived with hope, yet it brought one of the darkest days in the nation's memory. On September 11, 2001, terror struck at the heart of freedom. The Twin Towers fell, thousands perished, and the world stood still. In that moment of unimaginable loss, something ancient within the American spirit awoke: unity, resilience, and defiance. The country stood together, not as divided states, but as one people bound by grief and courage. The war on terror began, reshaping global politics and testing the limits of power, patience, and principle. From the deserts of Afghanistan to the streets of Baghdad, the United States once again found itself fighting for its vision of security and liberty in a world that had grown more complex than ever. The years that followed brought rapid transformation. Technology accelerated, economies shifted, and society evolved at a pace no generation before had known. Smartphones became lifelines, information moved faster than thought, and social media reshaped how people saw themselves and their world. Voices once unheard found power, movements rose from the streets to the screens, and debates once confined to halls of government spilled into the lives of everyday citizens. The struggle for equality continued in new forms for gender, race, and identity as each generation redefined what freedom meant. The United States, always a reflection of its contradictions, found itself facing inward as much as outward, battling not empires abroad but divisions within. Yet through every storm, innovation remained its heartbeat. Scientists mapped the human genome, engineers built rockets that returned safely to Earth, and technology turned impossibility into routine. The same restless energy that once drove settlers across frontiers now fueled exploration into space and cyberspace alike. The American spirit evolved but never faded, a force that questioned, created, and dreamed endlessly. Even as crises rose, economic recessions, political polarization, natural disasters, the foundation held. Every challenge became another chapter in a long story of reinvention. The strength of the United States was never just in its armies or wealth, but in its capacity to begin again, to rise from failure stronger than before. The 2008 financial crisis tested that strength once more. Markets collapsed, jobs vanished. Millions lost homes and savings. The illusion of endless prosperity broke, but in its place came resilience. Communities rebuilt, innovation persisted, and leadership emerged from unexpected places. The election of Barack Obama marked a new moment in history, the first African-American president. Leading a nation once divided by the chains of slavery, his rise symbolized not perfection, but progress, the living proof of what generations had fought and sacrificed for. Hope and change became more than slogans. They became reminders that the American story is never finished, always being rewritten by those brave enough to believe. The following decade brought new questions, new trials. Technology became a mirror reflecting both brilliance and chaos. The digital revolution empowered millions yet eroded trust, as truth became harder to define and connection both uniting and dividing. Global challenges grew: climate change, inequality, pandemics, and the weight of leadership pressed heavier on the nation's shoulders. Yet history had prepared America for this. Every age had demanded adaptation, every crisis had forged new strength. As the world faced uncertainty, the United States once again became a laboratory of ideas, from renewable energy to artificial intelligence, from social reform to private space exploration. It stumbled, argued, rebuilt, and dreamed onward, as it always had. In the 2020s, the world changed again. A global pandemic halted life as people knew it. Cities grew silent, economies froze, and fear spread faster than disease. But even then, innovation and unity rose to meet the moment. Scientists developed vaccines in record time, communities adapted to survive, and technology bridged distances once thought impossible. The crisis reminded everyone of fragility, but also of resilience. The story of America was never about perfection, it was about perseverance. Through pandemics, wars, and revolutions, the same spirit endured, one that refused to surrender to despair. As the nation looked inward after the storm, conversations deepened about justice, truth, and equality. Old wounds resurfaced, not to divide but to be confronted. The struggle for identity, fairness, and inclusion became the next frontier, not of land or space, but of conscience. The next generation, born into a digital age, demanded answers, demanded honesty, demanded hope. They carried the legacy of those who came before: revolutionaries, workers, dreamers, soldiers, and builders, and with them, the enduring belief that a single nation could stand as a symbol of both imperfection and possibility. The 21st century has only just begun, yet already it carries the echoes of every century before it. The story of the United States has never been one of ease, but of effort. From the wilderness of the first colonies to the skyline of modern cities, from the silence of despair to the roar of progress, every chapter has been a reminder that freedom is not a destination but a journey. The experiments of democracy, equality, and human rights continue to evolve, tested and refined by the hands of each generation. The nation moves forward, not because it is flawless, but because it refuses to stop reaching for something greater, something just beyond the horizon, where dreams meet destiny and history continues to unfold. The story of America is not just the story of a nation, it is the story of humanity's endless pursuit of freedom, purpose, and progress. From the first settlers who crossed unknown seas to the visionaries who reached for the stars, every generation has carried the torch forward, shaping a legacy built on courage and conviction. Empires have risen and fallen, yet the idea of America endures because it was never just about borders or power, it was about belief. Belief in equality, in justice, in promise that no matter where one begins, a better tomorrow can always be built. The road has never been straight. The country has stumbled, divided, and rebuilt itself time and again. But each challenge, each conflict, each victory has strengthened the foundation of a greater truth: that freedom is worth fighting for and unity is worth preserving. The American story is unfinished, written daily by millions of hands and hearts that continue to dream, build, and rise. And so, as history moves forward, the legacy continues a living testament to what humanity can achieve when courage conquers fear, when hope outlasts hardship, and when ordinary people dare to believe that they can change the world. This is not just the past of a nation, it is the promise of its future, forever unfolding, forever reaching for the light beyond the horizon.